Hello everyone, I hope that you don't mind my low energy in this video. I really want to get this video done and fulfill my promise of doing the Q&A, but I've been feeling extremely depressed in the past 3 days. So I'm gonna have probably lots of pauses, and I'm gonna be even less upbeat than usual. I hope you don't mind. I have taken note of all your questions. There are 7 people who asked me questions for this part. Thank you. Thank you again to all the subscribers who've helped me reach 500 subscribers. So I've numbered also the people who have asked me questions because I wanted to do a random draw. So I'm going to ask my wife now to pick one number between 1 and 7. Could you pick a number between 1 and 7?
3.
3, okay. Now pick 3 other numbers aside from 3, between 1 and 7.
4, 5, 7.
4, 5, 7. Okay. Number 3 is Andrew. Andrew is going to be the one who will receive my copy of Create Dangerously by Albert Camus, The Power and Responsibility of the Artist. And 4, 5, 7. 4 is Saba, 5 is Aprilia, or Aprilia, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and 7 is Niall Scanlon. Again, I hope my pronunciation is correct. Saba, Aprilia, and Niall will receive the links to my Patreon exclusive videos, the 3 that I had selected already. Out of the 19 Patreon only videos, these 3 are about my journey is such a cheesy word, my life in academia, some of my experiences in academia, the experience of feeling stuck occasionally, the experience of having good teachers, and the experience of your own life being shaped by the agendas and by the forces that exist already in the academic world. All right, so I wanted to announce that successful YouTubers, what they do is that they don't announce these exciting things at the outset of the video, but I want to do the opposite of that. That's why I'm not as successful. All right, so my email is here. People that I mentioned, those 4 people, please email me, and Andrew should send me his address. The other ones, just their emails, so I can send them the links. Let's get to the questions. Peyman Sayat asked, what experimental psychology textbook do you recommend for a beginner? What do you think about Myers and Hansen's textbook of experimental psychology? I haven't read the Myers and Hansen textbook. My prejudice, my suspicion, my guess would be that, like most textbooks in psychology, it is dry and boring and longer than it should be. And that, again, like most textbooks in psychology, you don't need to read it. The word beginner is ambiguous. We have different kinds of beginners. We have a beginner who is very serious. We have a beginner who is not as serious. We have a beginner who is interested in becoming a researcher in psychology, applying the experimental method. We have a beginner who wants to know about the experimental method for philosophical reasons, for more general social scientific reasons. We have a beginner who might be interested in doing surveys and interviews and just interested in knowing, what am I missing now that I'm using interviews or surveys? What am I missing? What is it that the experimental method can do, my method cannot do? Or what is it that my method can do, the experimental method cannot do? Or maybe somebody might be interested in reading my book, but they might think that my book is too advanced. I don't know. That's a very self-serving thought to have. So beginner has different meanings. Assuming that we ignore those different meanings for a time, I'm going to do some recommendations. I'm going to make these 3 recommendations. And my recommendations are not textbooks. They are relatively easier and more engaging books. Actually, one of them I think is a textbook, but it is a relatively more fun textbook. So I would recommend the book 40 Studies That Changed Psychology by Roger Hawk. It covers, in a very concise manner, 40 classic studies that are influential not just in academic scholarly psychology, but they have also been influential in wider popular culture and personal beliefs. That these studies have influenced how ordinary people like us, lay people, think about their own mind and their own behavior. I would also recommend A History of Modern Experimental Psychology by George Mandler, published in 2007, and The Cognitive Psychology, Revisiting the Classics, edited by Eisner and Groom, published in 2015. So check out those, see from their superficial features, see whether you're interested in any of them. But if you continue with Myers and Hansen, of course, that's also fine. But be careful. Textbooks tend to take away and damage our curiosity and our interest and our passion. They tend to do that because of their dryness, because they're emphasizing covering all the bases, the ground, and they sacrifice something by pursuing that goal. Next, Rainbow Sky Gay and Proud asked, who are some of your favorite non-fiction writers and fiction writers, and what genres do you like to read in, and what genres do you want to read more of? I think when I was much younger, I used to think about authors and books in terms of favorite and non-favorite. And I see that might just be my own bias. I see that as a very youthful thing to say, to talk in terms of, when you talk in terms of favorites, it's very youthful. It sounds very youthful. It sounds like, it reminds me of my own early 20s and late teens. When I was in my early 20s, Roman Gary, the French author and politician, was my favorite author. I read everything that I could find by him. But I don't have favorites now. Part of it is because I try not to think about myself and my preferences while I'm reading books. I'm not important. When I was younger, I saw myself as very important. Of course, I was mistaken. So now I think in terms of what I need to read, in terms of what are the embarrassing gaps in my knowledge, not in general, but in terms of what I want to accomplish, in terms of my projects. Even when you look at the projects that I'm interested in doing, even those projects, with respect to those projects, I have embarrassingly big gaps that need to be addressed. So my interests are the intersection between social science and psychology in particular, philosophy, and again, more specifically, aesthetics and art theory. They are not, in my mind, those are not different fields, but they are overlapping fields, and that overlap is the area that I find most interesting. Because of that, I occasionally also read fiction. So genres, if I have to answer quickly, I would say social science. Are you a writer, as in a writer of fiction? No. I've written articles and I've also written this book, but I'm not a writer in that sense. I'm not a writer of fiction. Do you have any interest in writing fiction? I have very fleeting interests occasionally. I've tried writing short stories once or twice, but I don't think I'm good enough. I don't have the necessary skills. Do you have favorite gay writers, both non-fiction writers and fiction writers? I can't think of any non-fiction writers aside from, who was the guy who wrote The Way of Men? Jack Donovan. There was a very brief period in my university life when I became interested in Jack Donovan, specifically that book, The Way of Men, because that book was part of a journey where I was romanticizing my male friendships in particular. I enjoyed reading that book, but I don't classify it as a favorite. I think Jack Donovan is overplaying his hand, philosophically speaking. Fiction writers, favorite gay fiction writers. Marcel Proust comes to mind. I haven't read him in a long time. Other person who comes to mind more recently, William Somerset Maugham of Human Bondage. But similar to Proust, Somerset Maugham doesn't bring in his sexuality into his work. We can't really know. And people who claim to know, they claim to be able to decode an author's sexuality, they are doing that. They're decoding. They're claiming to be decoding. They're claiming that there are certain signs they can infer the author's sexuality. I'd be really interested in that. I'm not sure. Another person who comes to mind is James Baldwin. And another book which I'm unfortunate to say, unfortunately I haven't finished the book, but I was really interested in it, and I hope to be able to read it and reread it again and review it in the near future on this channel. is a book called Giovanni's Room. So I'll do that, I hope. But of course, I'm Rainbow Sky Gay and Proud. Send me some recommendations too, and I'm planning to go through them as well. That might change my answer to this question, might enrich and expand my answer. Andrew asked, given your experience in academia, limited experience, limited and biased, what are your thoughts on the future of post-secondary education? It seems like COVID-19 accelerated trends towards digitization, online learning, as well as academics teaching courses outside of traditional educational institutions. Do you think the standard four-year degree will be the norm in the future? It is a broad question, so any insights on this would be much appreciated. I don't think I have anything interesting or informative to say about this, even though I am interested in it. But it's just, I have to admit that I'm not informed enough. I don't know the patterns. And I'm also heavily distracted by my preferences. If you really have a preference for how things should work out in the future, that really prevents and interferes with clear thinking about a topic, about an issue. I would like to see education move away from that conventional standard four-year education, four-year degree, that pattern, because that pattern encourages the mindless approach to education, like going through things, going through the motion. I really don't like that. I don't like the people saying they're talking about their education, the very valuable years of their lives, describing it as going through motions. It's also very discouraging when you listen to your colleagues who say, "Oh, I had so many bad meetings today. I'm so sick of meetings that are an unavoidable part of being an academic." When you hear PhD students or postdocs dreading when they talk about, they dread the upcoming meeting with a supervisor or with a colleague. They're stressed about completely non-related things that are not related to their research, but they're stressed about deadlines or non-scholarly issues. All those things damage any kind of interest, passion, intrinsic motivation that a person might have in a topic, pursuing a lot of research. When we are really present with an activity, that activity acquires soul, acquires soulfulness. If I'm sitting somewhere writing in my diary, in my own journal, without any instrumental motivation, without any want of some gain in my prestige, some gain in my status, I'm just enjoying or I'm just exploring something for its own sake, that is when an activity becomes soulful. And following that logic, it's not difficult to realize that academic life has lost its soulfulness in many parts, for the most part. And it is great to move away from that, to accelerate trends that move us out of that and towards better alternatives. But it seems like COVID-19 and any other massive force that causes widespread changes, they do most of the damage to places and segments and groups who are already vulnerable, who are already in a relatively weaker positions. And people who are in power, they consolidate their power. They receive raises, they receive more status because they're responding somehow to this crisis. But they're not vulnerable. And for that reason, I'm not so hopeful about changes being positive. Universities really took a long time to take the form that they have taken now. And let's return to that topic later on. And if you have any reflections on this, I would also love to hear from you. Saba asked, tell us about how your life would have been different if you had pursued something other than cognitive psychology. Is there anything else you see yourself doing, like guitar? Some of you might not know, but for a period of 4 or 5 years, I was very seriously pursuing a career in classical music, specifically classical guitar. And I really wasn't good enough as a musician. I discovered that I could never, it was too late for me. People who are career musicians, they usually start at the age of 4, 5, 6, at the latest 7, 8 years old. I was much older when I started with guitar. So I discovered that I can never be a great musician. So what's the point? If I can't be great, I don't want to do it at all. I would like to think that regardless of the path that I take, that I gravitate towards something that is true to my character, and that has something to do with criticism, critique. So that could have been the path that would go through classical music and then music criticism. Could have been, I can imagine that. The path that I ended up taking went through psychology. Aprilia Susanti asks, what is your favorite book of Haruki Murakami? I haven't read enough Murakami to answer this question. And the ones that I have read, I've read a few short stories. The Second Bakery Attack is kind of interesting. The 100% Perfect Girl comes to mind. Birthday Girl. Aside from those few short stories, I also read The Strange Library, discussed on this channel. I read his first novel, Hear the Wind Sing, and the follow-up to that, Pinball, 1973. And it's a little bit, the Pinball and the Hear the Wind Sing, they're pretty strange. And what is, for me, special about Murakami is that it is very obvious to me that his books should be reread. And it is through rereading his books that at least I personally, can appreciate his work. Because during the first reading, he throws too many weird things at the reader. Too many weird things happen, and those weird things captivate our attention too much. They excessively captivate our attention to a point where we don't know really what is going on. We can't pay attention to the big picture. So for example, when I was reading Pinball, I think it is in Pinball, 1973, the main character, the narrator, has this very weird references to a book of philosophy, Immanuel Kant's book, Critique of Pure Reason. It's like, just occasionally just mentions it. And I was too distracted by that. And I was too preoccupied by figuring out, why is he mentioning this? Is it because he's doing a critique of logic, critique of pure reason? Is he like giving us a critique of modernity? And I was, I need a second reading. I need a reading that comes after that initial first impression, where I'm less distracted by those weird things, and I can pay attention to the big picture, so to speak. Yeah, I haven't read his major works, 1Q84 or The Norwegian Wood. And based on what I've read, I'm a little bit hesitant in looking forward to to other works by him. But I think I should. Also tell me, what are your favorite books of Murakami? What are the books that you would like me to read and review on this channel? If you have a response to that question, let me know. Next, Ruby on YXX asks, what do you think a student at university can do to make the most of their experience? I'm a really bad person to answer this question because it is not my specialty. It's not my strength to have a balanced life. In any phase in my life, I was too single-minded. I was never balanced. I never had a balanced life-work balance. I was always I always went too intensely in one direction. And when I was in university, I went too intensely in research, getting involved in laboratory research, psychology research. That's probably the best thing I did. In my graduate school, the best thing that I did was I took several courses in acting, several acting courses in improvisational theater, and script-based acting. And it was good because I met some of my really good friends through that, outside of psychology, outside of academic psychology. Continuing the question, I'm also doing a couple of psych courses this year. So if you have any thoughts about how you would teach or introduce psychology in particular, I would appreciate it. Psychology should be, in my opinion, psychology should be connected with two things, and it is very easy for psychology to lose its contact with these two things. One of them is day-to-day life, day-to-day experience. So it's like a kind of psychology that is not in touch with day-to-day experience. We should be very suspicious of that. A kind of psychology that doesn't say anything about culture, politics, social issues, about relationships, about falling in love, getting your heart broken. A psychology that doesn't say anything about these things doesn't deserve much attention. It's probably a purely prestige-oriented university project. I should be suspicious of it. That's one, so everyday life, real life. real life. The other is history. Psychology should be connected with a study of history, a mindfulness of history. So with those two notes, I would say it's important to pay attention to authors in psychology who try to do that, try to connect psychology to experience, real human experience, human relationships, and to its history. And as I was thinking about this question, I wrote two names here. One is Nikolai Malebranche. Malebranche was, I think, a Descartes scholar, a follower of René Descartes. The person who wrote about him, importantly, is Amadeo Giorgi. Amadeo Giorgi has an article published in 2013 in which he talks about revising the history of psychology based on, he tells us very good story, very convincing story, and he centers that story around Nikolai Malebranche and presents him as the first psychology. Why? Because Malebranche was interested in human error, and the attention to human error, Giorgi argues, is the beginning of psychology. If you're only interested in looking at the stars and learning about stars and planets and movements of the planets and physics, then psychology doesn't come to play a role. But once you identify certain misjudgments, misperceptions, certain mistakes that a human mind makes because of the way it systematically distorts its object of attention, its object of cognition. Once you become concerned with how the mind is biased in its approach to reality, then psychology and an interest in psychology comes to the foreground. So that's the Malebranche story. The other story, historical analysis, is a book by Michael Billig. And Michael Billig argues that we should call John Locke the first modern psychologist, John Locke, the philosopher. And the book that he does that in is The Hidden Roots of Critical Psychology. And importantly, Michael Billig contrasts John Locke with John Locke's godson, foster son, the third Earl of Shaftesbury. It took me a long time to realize that education, and in my case, psychological education, has so much to do with relationships with teachers. So finding a mentor is crucial. If you can find a mentor that you find inspiring, that you find engaging, somebody who stirs your passion, ignites your passion, try to cultivate that with respect. Don't go and send them long emails, like 3-page emails to the person that I want you to be my mentor. Try to slowly test the waters, test the boundaries, and see if the mentor is interested in spending time with you. Because being a mentor can be a very fulfilling experience too, if it is genuine, if the student is genuinely interested. So mentorship is, not to make it too long, but mentorship is important. And Niall Scanlon. You seem to get through a lot of books. I really don't. It might seem that way. So I was wondering a few things. How much of your day is spent reading? About 2 to 4 hours per day. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Do you have a specific method when it comes to note-taking? I don't have a specific method. Let me see. I underline. Occasionally I make marks. I make notes at the end and at the beginning of the book. I make notes on the margins. I have notes like this. See, I mark pages. These are pages where something important happened on that page. And if I'm doing something with the text, when I'm writing something, then I transfer my notes into a Word document. But it's not a fixed method. It's not a method that I present formulaically, or I turn into a program and say, this is my 3-step program for how to be a great note taker, or how to increase your reading productivity by 10 times. I wouldn't want to do that. That's an ego most of the time. I'm not saying always, but most of the time, it's neighborly music. One of my neighbors insist on publicly announcing their musical preference. Okay, so people who do that, people who want to sell speed reading programs, they are playing with our egos, the demands, the desire of the ego to be well read. And we shouldn't fall into that trap, and to instead embrace the alternative, which is the position that I'm not well read and I cannot be well read. I spend some time with the books that I can, learn a few things, and that's it. I don't want to be a Jordan Peterson. Remember when it was an interview, I don't remember who it was, when it was, somebody asked Jordan Peterson in a very telling moment, who's your favorite author? And Peterson quickly said, Dostoevsky. And the way, pay attention if you can find that clip. Pay attention to how he said Dostoevsky. The way he said Dostoevsky he's not just saying that my favorite author is that I really enjoy him. He's really claiming Dostoevsky. He's claiming that I am channeling the spirit of Dostoevsky. I am the Dostoevsky in the present time. So once a person starts acting that way, and it's an inevitable chain of events that results in taking anti-anxiety medication and then getting dependent on them, and then before you know it, something terrible is going to happen. So it's very important for us to not have that kind of desire, not have those ego-driven, vain project of an expert as such. I don't want to be an expert as such. I don't want to be somebody who can answer all questions. Like if somebody asks me, like Andrew asked, how do you see the future of academia? Oh, let me tell you how I see the future of academia. Somebody else will come and say, how do you see the relationship among the genders? I was like, oh, let me tell you this. What is your opinions on postmodernism and Marxism? Oh, like having opinions on everything. The expert as such, that is a false persona. That is a persona is like a bubble that will burst sooner or later. And intellectuals who come in and construct that kind of image of themselves, they make a splash. And I should make a video about that, the splash of the intellectual. And they always have some program to sell about how to read more, how to take notes better, how to be like me, how to understand Dostoevsky and the Bible, and so on and so forth. I know this is very tangentially related to the question, but I'm just free associating based on your question. So no specific method. I usually just take notes at the back, the last final pages of the book. Finally, is there a certain method you use for critiquing the books you read? I may be wrong, but to me, it is not good to have a method that is separate from the texts, a method that stands outside of the text. And I described to you a method. Even before I'm talking about what kind of books we are going to read, I first develop a method. It's like, this is a method. Step 1, do this with the text. Step 2, do this. The method should be a byproduct of our interaction with the text. So it has to be unique as the text is unique. Each text has to be faced after you throw the method out the window. This is what I wrote when I was thinking about this question. Just like how when you start a new relationship or when you start a new friendship, you don't start with a theory. You don't say, okay, I'm going to meet this new friend. Let me bring back my method, my toolbox, my friendship toolbox, or my romantic relationship toolbox. I need these tools when I'm engaged in a relationship or when I'm developing a relationship. The best thing to do, in my approach, is that my belief is that the best thing to do is to first throw away all the method. Of course, your background is already rich. You already have all the books that you've read before, just like all the friendships, all the relationships. But let it act implicitly. Let it act in the background. Let the text itself be the foreground. If you bring the method in, the method is baggage, and baggage in a negative way. The baggage like the baggage that we take into a relationship from our previous relationships. Method makes us heavy. We don't want to be heavy. We want to be light. Why is it that, when you look on YouTube, people who are, one of the very nice things about YouTube and BookTube is that a lot of book lovers, people who really genuinely have a love for reading, love for books. Whenever they talk about the genre of literary criticism, literary theory, art theory, they don't have much positive things to say about that genre. Most people don't say, most amateur readers, and amateur I mean driven by love. People who are driven by love, they don't say, this is my favorite book of literary criticism or methods of criticism. And that's because most of books of that genre, most books that belong to that genre are written by critics, academic critics, who have, for lack of better way of saying it, they have a stick up their ass. And they cannot have a baggage-free way of relating to text. So that stick that is misplaced in their metaphorically, that doesn't allow them freedom of movement, freedom of free reading. It doesn't allow them to enjoy. They are so concerned with judging. So to get to your question, I do also want to say a few things about, when I reflect on my critical engagement with the text, I think about it as afterthought. So I first read a book, and then there's a period of silence when we close the book and we put it aside. We put it aside, and the text is still working, and the medium in which the text is working, the medium of like the book is telling a story of one particular person and his particular story, and we have a lot of concrete situations, particular concrete situations, lots of descriptions of sensory situations, like perceptions and feelings and emotions. Once we give it enough time, all those concrete particulars, all those sensations and feelings and emotions, they transfer from their original medium and they come into the medium of thought. And the medium of thought is when thinking, philosophy, and criticism happens. And that is something that if we let it, it will happen. It comes from, I think, repetition. It comes from looking at other people doing it, looking at their language, and then forgetting it, of course. Forgetting it and then letting it happen when you are dealing with a text by yourself. Just like how if I read a book about marriage, I don't let that book filter my relationship with my wife. It stands on the side. Sometimes I might be reminded of it, but what is primary is my relationship with my wife. What is primary is my relationship with a friend. What is primary is my relationship with the text. Theory is secondary. Theory is another way of enjoying it, another way of thinking about it, another way of sharpening our taste, another way of telling a difference between good, bad, better, worse, the right basis of judgment, the wrong basis of judgment. Determining when is it that I was fooled by an author, when is it that I got the kind of pleasure that I would want to cultivate more, and when is it that I get a kind of pleasure that I don't want to cultivate more. It's an easy, cheap pleasure, for example. And the method grows with us. The method doesn't come first. I hope I didn't talk too much. Thank you for staying with me. Again, if you were among the people that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, please get in touch with me. Andrew, send me your address so I can send you the book. And for everybody else, thank you for your attention. I'll speak with you in the next video.